The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the mahogany dining table as my mother-in-law's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Honestly, David, I don't understand what you see in her. She contributes nothing to this family. Nothing. Her manicured fingers gestured dismissively in my direction, without even the courtesy of making eye contact. She's never going to amount to anything more than a burden. I sat frozen in my chair, the untouched slice of birthday cake growing soggy on the bone china plate before me. This was supposed to be a celebration of my 28th birthday, but like so many gatherings in the Montgomery household, it had devolved into another opportunity for Eleanor Montgomery to remind me of my place in their world, which, according to her, was nowhere at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My husband David shifted uncomfortably beside me, his fork scraping against his plate in a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. For a moment, I hoped he might defend me, might finally stand up to the woman who had spent the last 3 years systematically dismantling my confidence piece by carefully calculated piece. Instead, he cleared his throat and mumbled something about the weather, as if discussing the approaching storm outside could somehow wash away the venom his mother had just unleashed. Really, Eleanor? His father Richard chimed in from the head of the table, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with the air of a man accustomed to being the voice of reason in a house ruled by his wife's iron will. Perhaps we should focus on more pleasant topics this evening. Eleanor's laugh was like breaking glass. Pleasant? Richard, someone needs to address the elephant in the room. Our son is supporting a woman who has shown absolutely no ambition, no drive, no initiative to better herself or contribute meaningfully to society. She barely graduated from that community college with some worthless degree in graphic design, and what has she done with it? Nothing, absolutely nothing. The words hit me like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. What Eleanor didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while they saw a quiet, unremarkable woman who spent her days working part-time at a local flower shop and her evenings sketching in her notebook, I had been building something in secret. Something that would soon change everything they thought they knew about me. But that revelation was still months away. On this particular evening, as autumn rain began to patter against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Montgomery estate, I was still just Maya Chen, the disappointment they tolerated because their son had inexplicably fallen in love with me during his final semester at Harvard Business School. I had met David at a coffee shop near campus where I was working while taking night classes at the community college Eleanor loved to mock. He was charming, intelligent, and came from a world so different from mine that it might as well have been another planet. My parents had immigrated from Taiwan when I was 5, opening a small restaurant that barely kept us afloat. Money was always tight, opportunities always limited, and higher education was a luxury we couldn't afford beyond the basics. David, on the other hand, was old money, real old money. The kind that traced its roots back to railroad barons and steel magnates, the kind that came with summer houses in the Hamptons and winter trips to Aspen. His trust fund alone was worth more than my family had ever dreamed of earning in their lifetime. When we first started dating, I thought the differences between our backgrounds were romantic, like something out of a fairy tale. David was fascinated by my authenticity, my grounded perspective, my refreshing honesty. He loved hearing stories about working in my parents' restaurant, about learning to stretch every dollar, about creating beauty from whatever materials I could afford. But as our relationship grew serious and I was introduced to his family, the fairy tale began to crack around the edges. Eleanor made it clear from our first meeting that I was not what she had envisioned for her only son's future. She had expected someone from their social circle, someone with the right pedigree, the right connections, the right bank account. Someone who could enhance the Montgomery name, rather than, in her words, dilute it. The engagement had been a war zone. Eleanor had suggested multiple times that perhaps David and I should wait, take more time to really get to know each other before making such a significant commitment. She had introduced him to a parade of suitable alternatives, daughters of business partners, family friends, women who spoke the same language of privilege and expectation that the Montgomerys had perfected over generations. But David had insisted, and eventually, his parents had acquiesced to what they clearly viewed as a temporary lapse in judgment. They were confident that time would reveal my inadequacies, that I would eventually prove them right about my unworthiness of their son and their legacy. 3 years into our marriage, Eleanor was growing impatient with waiting for my inevitable failure. Maya barely works 20 hours a week at that little flower shop, she continued, her voice taking on the tone she used when discussing particularly distasteful subjects. 20 hours a week arranging daisies and carnations while David works 60-hour weeks building his career. It's simply unacceptable. I wanted to tell her that those 20 hours a week were strategic, that they gave me the flexibility I needed for my real work, the work that consumed my evenings and weekends and early mornings before David woke up. I wanted to explain that my little flower shop had become the perfect cover for what I was actually building, that the owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, had become more than just an employer. She had become a mentor who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. But I said nothing. I had learned that defending myself only provided Eleanor with more ammunition, more opportunities to demonstrate my inadequacy to her son. Better to endure the assault in silence and let them underestimate me. After all, underestimation had become my greatest asset. She doesn't even try to fit in, Eleanor pressed on, clearly building to some crescendo of disapproval. Remember the charity auction last month? While every other wife was networking, building connections, representing their husbands with dignity and purpose, Maya stood in the corner sketching in that ridiculous notebook of hers like some kind of teenager. The notebook, they all saw it as evidence of my immaturity, my inability to engage with the adult world of responsibility and social obligation. What they didn't realize was that every sketch, every design, every concept I captured in those pages was part of a business plan I had been developing for 2 years. A business plan that was about to change everything. David finally spoke, his voice carrying the weary tone of someone who had fought this battle too many times. Mother Maya is an artist. She sees the world differently than we do. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Even his defense felt like a slight, reducing my work to a charming quirk rather than the serious endeavor it actually was. But I had grown accustomed to being misunderstood, even by the man who claimed to love me. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. An artist, David, she doodles flowers and designs logos for local businesses that probably pay her in pocket change. That's not art, that's a hobby. A very expensive hobby that you're subsidizing while she plays at being creative. The irony was almost too much to bear. Eleanor was right about one thing. Local businesses had been paying me for design work. What she didn't know was how much they were paying, or how many of them there were, or how word of my work had spread far beyond our small Connecticut town through social media and word-of-mouth referrals. What started as helping Mrs. Rodriguez redesign the flower shop's website had snowballed into something I never expected. A bakery owner saw the flower shop's new branding and hired me to revamp theirs. A boutique owner noticed the bakery's social media engagement had tripled and wanted to know who was behind their new look. One client led to another, and another and another. I had discovered that I had a gift for understanding what small businesses needed to stand out in an increasingly crowded marketplace. More than that, I understood how to create brands that felt authentic, approachable, and aspirational all at once. While major design firms charged tens of thousands of dollars for rebrandings that often felt generic and soulless, I was creating intimate, personal brand experiences for a fraction of the cost. But I wasn't just cheap, I was good, really good. My clients' businesses were thriving in ways they had never experienced before. Sales were increasing, customer loyalty was strengthening, and other business owners were taking notice. 6 months ago, I had taken the leap and officially registered my business, Chen Creative Solutions. I had a website, business cards, a professional email address, and a growing portfolio of success stories. What I didn't have was anyone in my personal life who knew about it. The secrecy wasn't entirely intentional at first. David was so consumed with his work at Montgomery & Associates, the family law firm where he was expected to eventually make partner, that he rarely asked detailed questions about my days. When he did ask about my little projects, I gave vague answers about helping local businesses with their marketing materials. Technically true, but hardly the full picture. As for his family, I had learned that sharing my ambitions only provided them with more opportunities to diminish them. Better to let them think I was exactly what they accused me of being, unambitious, unmotivated, content to live off David's success, while I quietly built something that would eventually speak for itself. "You know what I think," Eleanor said, leaning back in her chair with the satisfied expression of someone preparing to deliver a killing blow. "I think David deserves better. I think he deserves a partner who matches his ambition, his intellect, his social standing. Someone who enhances his life rather than diminishing it." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Richard coughed uncomfortably. David's sister Amanda, who had been silent throughout most of the dinner, suddenly became very interested in her wine glass. Even the household staff, who had been discreetly clearing dishes, seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. I felt something crack inside me, not break, but crack, like ice under pressure. For 3 years, I had absorbed these attacks with grace, telling myself that actions would eventually speak louder than words. I had convinced myself that building something meaningful in secret was noble, that proving them wrong through success would be more satisfying than defending myself through words. But sitting there, watching my husband struggle to find even the most basic defense of my character, I realized that my silence hadn't been strategic, it had been enabling. By not standing up for myself, I had allowed them to create a narrative about who I was that bore no resemblance to reality. And worse, I had allowed David to believe that narrative too. "I think," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a whisper in a cathedral, "that you don't know me at all." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly, as if surprised that I had found my voice. "Excuse me. You don't know me," I repeated, meeting her gaze directly for the first time in months. "You've decided who I am based on where I come from and what you think I lack, but you've never actually bothered to find out who I really am or what I'm actually capable of." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Amanda finally looked up from her wine glass, her eyes wide with something that might have been respect or might have been horror. Richard cleared his throat again, but this time it sounded more like a warning than discomfort. Eleanor's perfectly composed facade flickered for just a moment, revealing something sharper underneath. "Oh, I know exactly who you are, dear. You're a young woman who got lucky enough to catch the attention of a man far above her station, and you're content to coast on that luck for the rest of your life." "You're wrong," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. "But I suppose you'll find that out eventually." The cryptic response clearly frustrated her, but before she could respond, David placed his hand on mine, the first gesture of support he had shown all evening. "That's enough," he said, though whether he was addressing his mother or me wasn't entirely clear. "This is supposed to be Maya's birthday celebration." Eleanor's smile was razor thin. "Of course, how thoughtless of me." She raised her wine glass in a mock toast, to Maya and to discovering one's true potential. The malice in her tone was unmistakable, but I raised my water glass anyway, meeting her toast with a smile of my own. "To discoveries," I agreed. "They're often quite surprising." As the evening wound down and we made our polite goodbyes, I found myself replaying the confrontation in my mind. Part of me regretted revealing even that small glimpse of defiance. My strategy had always been to remain underestimated, to let them think they knew exactly who I was while I worked toward proving them spectacularly wrong. But another part of me, a part that had been growing stronger with each successful client project, each positive review, each small victory in building my business, was tired of hiding. Tired of pretending to be less than I was for the comfort of people who had never shown me an ounce of genuine respect or kindness. During the quiet car ride home, David finally broke the silence. "You know she doesn't mean it personally, right? Mother she has very specific ideas about what success looks like." I turned to study his profile in the darkness, illuminated only by the dashboard lights and the occasional street lamp. After 5 years together, I thought I knew every expression he was capable of making, but tonight he looked like a stranger. There was something weary in his features, something defeated that I had never noticed before. "Doesn't she?" I asked. Because it felt pretty personal to me. He sighed, the sound heavy with years of navigating between his family's expectations and his own desires. "She's protective of our family's reputation. Sometimes that makes her seem harsh, but her intentions aren't malicious." The word seam hung between us like a revelation. After 3 years of enduring Eleanor's calculated cruelty, David still believed it was just an unfortunate communication style rather than deliberate emotional warfare. Either he was incredibly naive, or he had been trained from childhood to normalize the kind of behavior that would be considered abusive in any other context.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
David, I said carefully, what do you think I do all day? The question caught him off guard. I watched him glance at me quickly before returning his attention to the road. What do you mean? I mean specifically, when you leave for work in the morning and come home at night, what do you think fills those hours for me? He was quiet for a long moment, and I realized with a growing sense of unease that he was actually struggling to answer the question. You work at the flower shop, he said finally, and you work on your art projects, your designs. What kind of designs? Another pause. Graphics? Logos? I'm not really sure of the technical terms. The casual dismissal in his voice, not intentionally cruel like his mother's, but somehow worse because it was so unconscious, made something fundamental shift inside me. Here was the man who claimed to love me, who had chosen me over all the eligible alternatives his family had paraded before him, and he had no idea what I actually did with my time. He knew I worked on designs, the way someone might know their spouse had a hobby of knitting or gardening, a pleasant way to pass the time, but hardly worth understanding in any detail. He had never asked to see my work, never inquired about my clients, never shown curiosity about the projects that consumed my passion and energy. In that moment, I realized that David's version of defending me wasn't really about defending me at all. It was about defending his right to choose a wife based on whatever criteria he found appealing, regardless of whether that choice made practical sense to his family. I was less a person to him than I was a statement about his independence from their expectations. The thought was more devastating than anything Eleanor had said over dinner. Maya, his voice pulled me back from the spiral of realization I had been tumbling down. You're very quiet, just thinking, I said, which was true enough. About what Mother said. You shouldn't let it get to you. She'll come around eventually. The naive optimism in his voice made me want to laugh and cry simultaneously. After 3 years of increasingly hostile encounters, he still believed his mother would somehow warm up to me once she got to know me better. He couldn't see what was obvious to everyone else in the room, that Eleanor's disapproval wasn't based on misunderstanding. It was based on a fundamental belief that I was beneath their family's standards, and no amount of time or familiarity was going to change that assessment. But maybe that was about to change for entirely different reasons. That night, after David fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about the email I had received that afternoon. An email I hadn't had the chance to process fully before we left for dinner at his parents' house. An email that was going to change everything. 3 weeks earlier, I had submitted a proposal for a rebranding project, unlike anything I had attempted before. Morrison Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing company based in Chicago, was looking to completely overhaul their corporate identity. They had been in business for 40 years, but their brand looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. They were losing ground to more modern competitors, and needed a complete visual transformation to attract younger clients and top talent. It was exactly the kind of project I had been working toward, high profile, high stakes, with the potential for significant impact and recognition. But it was also far beyond anything I had done before. My portfolio was filled with local restaurants, boutiques, and small service businesses. Morrison Industries was a different league entirely. I had spent weeks on the proposal, researching the company's history, analyzing their competition, developing a comprehensive strategy for repositioning their brand in the marketplace. I had poured everything I had learned over 2 years of building Chen Creative Solutions into a presentation that I hoped would convince them to take a chance on an unknown designer. The email that arrived that afternoon was their response. Not only had Morrison Industries accepted my proposal, but they had agreed to my fee, a fee that was more than David made in 3 months at his family's prestigious law firm. More than that, they were so impressed with my strategic thinking that they wanted to discuss additional projects, including redesigning the websites and marketing materials for 3 of their subsidiary companies. It was the breakthrough I had been working toward for 2 years, the validation that my business was ready to move beyond small local clients to national recognition. But more than that, it was proof that Eleanor Montgomery was spectacularly wrong about my potential and my worth. As I lay there in the darkness, I thought about the moment earlier that evening when Eleanor had dismissed my work as doodling flowers, an hobby that David subsidizes. By the end of the week, I would be signing a contract that would make me financially independent for the first time in my life. By the end of the month, I would be earning more than her son. The irony was delicious, but it was also complicated. Part of me wanted to march into their next family gathering, with my Morrison Industries contract, and watch Eleanor's face as she realized how completely she had misjudged me. I wanted to see the moment when her certainty about my worthlessness cracked and crumbled. But another part of me, the part that had spent years learning to be strategic rather than reactive, knew that timing would be everything. The success of the Morrison project could open doors I had never imagined, could establish Chen Creative Solutions as a serious player in the corporate branding world, but only if I handled it correctly. More importantly, I was beginning to realize that proving Eleanor wrong might not be the most significant outcome of my success. The conversation in the car had revealed something about my marriage that I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. David's casual dismissal of my work, his inability to articulate what I actually did with my time, his assumption that his mother's cruelty was just a communication problem, all of it pointed to a fundamental lack of understanding about who I was as a person. I had spent so much energy trying to prove myself worthy of the Montgomery family's acceptance that I had never stopped to consider whether their acceptance was worth having. Eleanor's disapproval had stung because I had accepted her right to judge me. But what if her judgment was based on values I didn't actually share? What if the life she thought I should aspire to, the life of charity galas and social connections and maintaining appearances, wasn't the life I wanted at all? The Morrison Industries project was going to force all of these questions to the surface. There would be travel involved, client meetings in Chicago, industry conferences where my work would be showcased. I would be stepping into a professional world that the Montgomerys knew nothing about, building relationships and establishing credibility in circles where their family name and old money connections meant nothing. For the first time since meeting David, I was going to have the opportunity to see who I could become when I wasn't constantly trying to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. The thought was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. I must have finally drifted off to sleep, because I woke to my alarm at 6:30, the same time I had been waking up for months to work on client projects before David got up and before I had to leave for the flower shop. This morning routine had become sacred to me, 2 hours of uninterrupted time to focus on building my business while the rest of the world was still sleeping. David remained unconscious beside me, his breathing deep and regular. His ability to sleep soundly through any disturbance had always amazed me, but this morning it felt symbolic of something larger. While I was quietly transforming my life in the early morning hours, he remained blissfully unaware that anything was changing at all. I slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to my makeshift office, a corner of our guest bedroom that I had converted into a workspace with a folding table, an ergonomic chair I had splurged on when my back started aching from long design sessions, and a bulletin board covered with inspiration images, client testimonials, and business goals. The Morrison Industries folder sat prominently on my desk, thick with research and preliminary design concepts. Today I would be calling their project manager to discuss timeline and logistics. Today I would be taking the first concrete step toward a level of professional success that would make Eleanor Montgomery's criticisms not just wrong but laughably irrelevant. But first I needed to understand exactly what I was walking into. I opened my laptop and began researching Morrison Industries more deeply than I had during the proposal phase. I wanted to understand not just their business model and market position, but their corporate culture, their executive team, their recent press coverage. If I was going to succeed at this level, I needed to be prepared for every aspect of the professional relationship. What I found was encouraging. Morrison Industries had a reputation for innovation and employee satisfaction. Their CEO, Patricia Morrison, granddaughter of the company's founder, was featured regularly in business magazines as an example of successful second-generation leadership. The company had been growing steadily for the past 5 years, expanding into new markets and winning industry awards for both their products and their workplace culture. More importantly, they seemed to value creativity and strategic thinking over traditional credentials. Several of their recent hires had come from unexpected backgrounds, chosen for their fresh perspectives rather than their pedigrees. It was exactly the kind of environment where my combination of creative talent and business instincts could thrive. As I read testimonials from current employees and industry analysts, I began to envision a version of my professional life that bore no resemblance to the limited future Eleanor had predicted for me. These weren't people who cared about social connections or family names. They cared about results, innovation, and the ability to solve complex problems with creative solutions. It was a world where my background, growing up in a family that had to fight for every opportunity, learning to create value from limited resources, understanding what it meant to build something from nothing, would be seen as an asset rather than a liability. I spent the next hour refining my approach for the initial client call, preparing questions that would demonstrate my strategic thinking and commitment to their success. This wasn't just about creating a new logo or color palette. This was about helping them tell their story in a way that would resonate with their target audiences and differentiate them from their competitors. By 8:30, I could hear David moving around upstairs, getting ready for another day at Montgomery & Associates. I saved my work and closed the laptop, transforming back into the version of myself that my husband and his family thought they knew, quiet Maya, who worked part-time at a flower shop and spent her free time on harmless creative hobbies. The duality was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain, but for now, it was still necessary. The Morrison project would take months to complete, and I wanted to see how far it could take my business before I revealed the full scope of what I had been building. There was power in being underestimated, but there was also power in choosing the moment when you stopped allowing yourself to be underestimated. As I headed upstairs to get ready for my shift at the flower shop, I caught myself smiling for the first time since Eleanor's birthday dinner assault. Today was the beginning of something that was going to change everything they thought they knew about me. The question was whether I would still be the same person by the time they figured it out. The phone call with Morrison Industries lasted 2 hours. Patricia Morrison herself had joined the conversation, along with their marketing director and head of operations. What began as a simple logistics discussion evolved into an intensive strategy session, where I found myself presenting ideas I hadn't even planned to share until later in the project timeline. Your insight into our brand positioning challenges is exactly what we need, Patricia said toward the end of the call. I have to admit, when our team first reviewed your proposal, there were concerns about your experience with companies of our size. But this conversation has eliminated every doubt. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to keep my voice steady despite the surge of validation coursing through me. I appreciate your confidence. I know this is a significant leap from my previous projects, but I believe that fresh perspective is exactly what will make the difference. We agree. In fact, we'd like to discuss expanding the scope even further. We're planning a complete digital transformation over the next 18 months, and we want brand consistency across every touchpoint. Would Chen Creative Solutions be interested in serving as our primary creative partner for the entire initiative? The question hung in the air like a life-changing opportunity wrapped in professional language. What they were describing wasn't just a single project, it was a retainer relationship that could sustain my business for years and establish me as a serious player in corporate branding. Absolutely, I managed, hoping my excitement didn't bleed through too obviously. I'd be honored to discuss that possibility. After we scheduled follow-up meetings and I hung up, I sat in my makeshift office, staring at the notes I had scribbled during the conversation. Numbers that represented more money than I had ever imagined earning. Timeline commitments that would require me to hire additional staff. Growth projections that would transform Chen Creative Solutions from a one-person operation into a legitimate agency. But more than the financial implications, what struck me was how the conversation had felt. Patricia and her team had treated me as an equal, a strategic partner whose insights were valued and whose expertise was respected. They had asked thoughtful questions about my process, challenged my ideas in ways that improved them, and demonstrated genuine enthusiasm for collaborating with me. It was the complete opposite of every interaction I had ever had with the Montgomery family. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Eleanor dismissed my work as worthless hobby, I was being courted by executives who understood exactly how valuable strategic creative thinking could be to their bottom line. While David couldn't articulate what I actually did for a living, Patricia Morrison was prepared to entrust her company's entire brand transformation to my vision and capabilities. I spent the rest of the morning before my flower shop shift outlining what this expanded partnership would require. Additional staff, upgraded technology, possibly a real office space instead of the corner of our guest bedroom. Most importantly, it would require me to step fully into my role as a business owner, rather than someone who occasionally took on freelance projects. The transformation would be impossible to hide. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed my distraction the moment I walked into petal and stem. Carmen Rodriguez had owned the flower shop for 15 years, building it from a small corner store into the premier floral destination in our town. She was in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair always pulled back in a practical bun and hands that bore the calluses of someone who had spent decades working with thorns and stems. More than an employer, Carmen had become the closest thing I had to a mentor. She understood what it meant to build a business from nothing, to prove yourself in a world that constantly underestimated your capabilities. When I had first approached her about redesigning her shop's branding 2 years ago, she had been skeptical. But when the results spoke for themselves, increased foot traffic, higher average sales, a social media following that brought customers from neighboring towns, she had become my biggest advocate. "You look different today," she said, studying my face as I tied my apron behind the counter. Something good happened. I glanced around the shop, confirming we were alone before allowing myself to smile. The Morrison Industries project came through. Not just the original contract, they want to expand it into something much bigger. Carmen's eyes widened. She was one of the few people who knew the full scope of what I had been building, partly because she had referred several clients to me, and partly because she understood the strategic value of discretion. "How much bigger?" she asked, moving closer so we could speak in lowered voices. "Big enough that I'll need to hire employees. Big enough that it won't be a part-time thing anymore." "Maya, that's incredible."
Her smile was genuine, proud in a way that reminded me painfully of how my own mother might have reacted if she were still alive. "When do you start?" "Initial meetings next week in Chicago. Full project launch within the month." I paused, the weight of what I was about to say settling over me. "Carmen, I think I need to give you notice." She had been expecting this conversation for months, but hearing it out loud still made both of us emotional. Petal and stem had been my refuge, the place where I could be competent and valued while I built something bigger in secret. Carmen had been the first person to believe in my potential when I was still figuring out what that potential might be. 2 weeks, she asked. "If that works for you. I know it's not much time to find a replacement." Carmen waved dismissively. "I've been thinking about reducing my hours anyway. Maybe hiring someone part-time, maybe just managing the big events myself." She moved to the computer behind the counter, pulling up the appointment calendar. "Besides, you're going to send me so much business from your fancy corporate clients that I'll need to expand, not replace." Her confidence in my future success was both touching and terrifying. She believed in me so completely that failure felt like it would be a betrayal of her faith as much as my own ambitions. We spent the rest of the afternoon discussing the transition logistics while serving customers who had no idea they were witnessing the end of an era. Every bouquet I arranged, every consultation I provided, every small interaction felt tinged with nostalgia for this simpler version of my professional life. But it was also tinged with excitement for what came next. Around 4 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed and Eleanor Montgomery walked in. She was impeccably dressed as always, her blonde hair styled in the kind of expensive cut that required weekly maintenance, her handbag probably worth more than most people's monthly salary. But there was something different about her demeanor today, something more purposeful than her usual air of casual superiority. "Maya," she said, approaching the counter with what might have been mistaken for a genuine smile if you didn't know her as well as I did. "How lovely to see you at work." The emphasis on the last word was subtle but unmistakable. This wasn't a social visit or even a floral purchase. This was Eleanor making a point about my place in the world order. "Mrs. Montgomery," I replied evenly. "What can I help you with today?" "I'm planning a small dinner party for this weekend. Nothing elaborate, just 12 people. I'll need centerpieces that coordinate with my dining room." She paused, looking around the shop with the kind of assessment that suggested she was cataloging everything for future criticism. Something understated, elegant, not too artistic. Again, the carefully chosen words designed to diminish. Eleanor had probably driven past 3 other flower shops to come here, not because she preferred our arrangements but because she wanted to see me in what she perceived as my natural habitat, serving people like her, taking orders, arranging flowers according to other people's specifications. Of course, I said, pulling out our consultation form. What's your color palette and budget? Budget isn't a concern, she said airily, which we both knew was meant to emphasize the difference between her financial freedom and what she assumed was my financial dependence. I trust your professional judgment. The word professional was delivered with just enough skepticism to make it clear she was being sarcastic. This entire interaction was theater, a performance designed to reinforce the hierarchy she believed existed between us. I began asking the standard questions about table size, lighting, and style preferences, taking notes with the same careful attention I gave every client. But as Eleanor described her vision for the dinner party, an intimate gathering of influential couples to discuss a charitable initiative she was spearheading, I found myself thinking about the conversation I had had with Patricia Morrison that morning. Here was Eleanor, planning a dinner party where she would undoubtedly hold court as the gracious hostess, accepting praise for her philanthropic efforts, while never actually getting her hands dirty with the real work of creating change. Meanwhile, I had just committed to a project that would directly impact hundreds of employees and potentially transform an entire company's trajectory. The contrast was stark, and for the first time I felt genuinely sorry for her. "This sounds like a lovely event," I said when she finished describing her requirements. "I'll have preliminary designs ready for your approval by Thursday." "Wonderful." Eleanor's smile was sharp-edged. "You know, Maya, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem much more natural in this environment. More comfortable. I think David forgets sometimes that not everyone is cut out for the demands of our social circle." The comment was vintage Eleanor, superficially supportive while actually being deeply insulting. She was suggesting that my proper place was here, among the flowers and service industry professionals, rather than in the boardrooms and charity galas where David's wife was expected to appear. 6 months ago, the comment would have wounded me. Today, it just seemed sad. "I do love working with beautiful things," I agreed, gesturing around the shop. "There's something satisfying about creating something that brings joy to people's lives." "Exactly," Eleanor said, clearly pleased that I was acknowledging what she saw as my limitations. "It's important to know where one's talents lie." As she left with promises to call if she had any changes to her order, I realized that this might be one of the last times I would have to endure her condescension without being able to respond honestly. Within weeks, the Morrison Industries project would be public knowledge. Within months, Chen Creative Solutions would be established enough that Eleanor's opinions about my potential would be obviously irrelevant. The thought filled me with anticipation rather than vindictiveness. I didn't want to humiliate Eleanor or prove her wrong out of spite. I wanted to prove her wrong because her assumptions about what constituted value and worth were fundamentally flawed, and I wanted to be living proof that success could come from unexpected places in unexpected ways. That evening, David came home from work more stressed than usual. He dropped his briefcase by the door with more force than necessary and loosened his tie with sharp, frustrated movements. "Rough day?" I asked from the kitchen, where I was preparing dinner with one eye on my laptop screen. I had been reviewing Morrison Industries' competitor analysis while cooking, trying to make the most of every available minute. "The Hartwell case is falling apart," he said, slumping into a chair at our kitchen table. 6 months of work, and the client is threatening to settle rather than go to trial. Father is not pleased. Richard Montgomery's displeasure was a significant concern in David's world. At Montgomery and Associates, family dynamics and professional hierarchy were inextricably linked. David's path to partnership wasn't just about his legal skills, it was about proving himself worthy of carrying on the family legacy. "I'm sorry," I said, closing the laptop and giving him my full attention. "What went wrong?" David launched into a detailed explanation of legal strategy and client relations that I listened to with the same focus I gave everything he shared about his work. But as he talked, I found myself thinking about the fundamental difference between his professional challenges and mine. David's success was dependent on maintaining existing systems, the law firm his grandfather had founded, the client relationships his father had cultivated, the reputation the Montgomery name had established over decades. His job was to prove himself worthy of inheriting what already existed. My success was dependent on creating something entirely new. Every client I gained, every project I completed, every strategic decision I made was building something that hadn't existed before. There was no family legacy to uphold or disappoint, no predetermined path to follow. There was just my vision, my skills, and my willingness to risk failure in pursuit of something meaningful. The realization made me understand why Eleanor found me so threatening. It wasn't really about my background or my bank account or my social connections. It was about what I represented, the possibility that value could be created rather than inherited, that worth could be earned rather than assigned by birth. Maybe the Hartwell situation will work out better than you think, I offered when David finished venting his frustrations. Sometimes what looks like a setback opens up opportunities for a different kind of success. He looked at me with surprise, as if he hadn't expected such a philosophical response. That's very optimistic of you. I've been thinking a lot lately about how success gets defined, I said carefully. Sometimes we get so focused on one version of how things should go that we miss other possibilities. David nodded absently, already turning his attention to the mail that had arrived that afternoon. The moment for deeper conversation had passed, but I noticed that he seemed slightly more relaxed than when he had first walked through the door. After dinner, while David retreated to his home office to prepare for the next day's meetings, I returned to my own workspace to finalize the Morrison Industries timeline. The project would officially begin the following Monday with a kickoff meeting in Chicago. I would need to book flights, arrange for overnight accommodations, and prepare presentation materials that would set the tone for our entire working relationship. But more than the logistical preparations, I needed to prepare myself mentally for stepping into a professional identity I had never fully inhabited before. For 2 years, I had been building Chen Creative Solutions in secret, treating it as a side project that might someday become something more. Starting Monday, it would be my primary professional identity, and I would need to own that transformation completely. The thought was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. I was deep in research about Morrison Industries' industry landscape when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was brief but intriguing. "Maya, this is Jennifer Carfield from Carfield Communications. Patricia Morrison gave me your contact information. We should talk." I knew the name Carfield Communications from my research into corporate branding agencies. They were a mid-sized firm based in New York that specialized in integrated marketing campaigns for companies undergoing major transitions. Their client list included several Fortune 500 companies, and their work was regularly featured in industry publications. Why would they be contacting me? I Googled Jennifer Carfield and found an impressive resume. MBA from Wharton, 15 years of experience at major agencies, founder of her own firm 3 years ago. Her company's website showcased sophisticated campaigns that combined strategic thinking with creative execution in ways that resulted in measurable business outcomes. This was exactly the kind of professional I aspired to become. I crafted a careful response. "Hi Jennifer. Thank you for reaching out. I'd be happy to discuss whatever opportunity you have in mind. When would be convenient for a call?" Her reply came within minutes. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. EST. I have a proposition that might interest you." I confirmed the time and spent the rest of the evening wondering what Patricia Morrison might have told Jennifer Carfield about our initial conversation. The Morrison project was significant, but it was still just one client. What kind of proposition would emerge from a single successful phone call? The next morning, I woke before my alarm again, but this time my early start was driven by nervous energy rather than routine productivity. The call with Jennifer Carfield felt like it could be another turning point, another door opening to possibilities I hadn't yet imagined. I spent extra time that morning researching Carfield Communications' recent projects and Jennifer's professional background. I wanted to understand not just what her company did, but how they thought about the industry and where they saw future opportunities. What I I found was encouraging. Jennifer had built her firm around the idea that the best creative solutions came from understanding business strategy at the deepest level. Her team included not just designers and copywriters, but former consultants, data analysts, and industry specialists who could provide insights that purely creative agencies often missed. It was exactly the kind of approach I had been trying to develop with Chen Creative Solutions, creative work that was grounded in strategic thinking and business results, rather than just aesthetic appeal. At exactly 2 o'clock, my phone rang. "Maya, thank you for making time," Jennifer said without preamble. Her voice carried the kind of confidence that came from years of successful client relationships and business development. "Patricia Morrison was very impressed with your initial conversation yesterday. She mentioned that you brought strategic insights she hadn't expected from a creative partner." "I appreciate that feedback," I replied, settling into my chair and opening a fresh notebook. "Morrison Industries has fascinating challenges from a brand positioning perspective." "That's exactly what Patricia said you'd say." Jennifer laughed. "Most creative professionals focus on the visual execution. You were asking questions about market differentiation and competitive advantage. That's the kind of thinking we value at Carfield Communications." I waited, sensing that this conversation was building towards something specific. "I'll cut to the chase," Jennifer continued. "We're looking for creative partners who can handle projects of Morrison's scope and complexity. Our client roster has been growing faster than our capacity, and we need to identify reliable collaborators who share our approach to strategic creative work."
My pulse quickened. What kind of collaboration are you envisioning? Project-based partnerships initially, with the possibility of more formal relationships if things work out well. We have 3 clients right now who need comprehensive brand overhauls, similar to what Morrison is undertaking. Rather than turning down the business or rushing our own team, we'd prefer to partner with someone whose work we trust. The opportunity she was describing was exactly what I had been hoping would emerge from the Morrison project. Not just one significant client, but access to a pipeline of similar opportunities through an established agency with a proven track record. "I'm definitely interested," I said, trying to keep my voice professional despite the excitement building in my chest. "What would the next steps look like?" "I'd like to see your work, not just the Morrison proposal, but your portfolio and your process for approaching strategic brand challenges. Would you be available to present to our team next week? We could coordinate with your Chicago trip if that works logistically." I glanced at my calendar, mentally calculating travel arrangements and timing. That could work. "What day were you thinking?" "Thursday afternoon. You could fly from Chicago to New York, present to our team, and be home by Friday evening." The practicalities of what she was describing hit me suddenly. This wasn't just a phone conversation or even a single meeting. This was the beginning of a professional relationship that would require regular travel, client presentations, and coordination with teams in multiple cities. It was the kind of business development that would be impossible to hide from David and his family. "Thursday works for me," I heard myself saying. Should I plan for a formal presentation or more of a working session? Formal presentation. Our senior team, maybe 8 people, and will want to see your thinking process as much as your creative output. Plan for 90 minutes. After we discussed logistics and I hung up, I sat in my makeshift office trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 24 hours, my business had gone from a successful local operation to the potential foundation for something much larger and more sophisticated. But more than the professional implications, I was struck by the personal ones. The Maya who had sat silently through Eleanor's birthday dinner attacks was about to become the Maya who flew between Chicago and New York for high-stakes client presentations. The woman David's family saw as an unambitious burden was about to step into a professional identity that would command respect in boardrooms they had never been invited to enter. The transformation was happening faster than I had anticipated, and there would be no way to manage it gradually or quietly. That afternoon at Petal and Stem, I told Carmen about the Carfield Communications opportunity. Her reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "Maya, this is incredible. Do you understand what this means?" "I think so," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I had processed all the implications yet. "This means you're not just building a business, you're building a reputation. Jennifer Carfield doesn't call unknown designers."
Patricia Morrison doesn't refer people she doesn't trust completely. You're being invited into a professional network that most people spend decades trying to access. Carmen's perspective helped me understand why I felt both excited and overwhelmed. This wasn't just about individual projects, or even financial success. This was about being recognized as a peer by people whose expertise and achievements I genuinely respected. I need to tell David, I said suddenly. The words came out before I had consciously decided to say them, but as soon as they were spoken, I knew they were true. Carmen nodded. You can't travel to Chicago and New York without him noticing. It's not just the travel, I said slowly, working through my thoughts out loud. It's everything. The scope of these projects, the level of commitment they require, the financial implications. This isn't something I can keep treating as a hobby. Have you thought about how you want to handle that conversation? I had been avoiding thinking about it, but Carmen's question forced me to confront the reality of my situation. David knew I did design work, but he had no idea of the scale or sophistication of what Chen Creative Solutions had become. He certainly had no idea that I was about to step into a professional identity that would rival or exceed his own career achievements. More complicated still, I wasn't sure how he would react to discovering that I had been building something this significant without including him in the process. On one level, his lack of curiosity about my work had given me the freedom to develop my business without external pressure or interference. On another level, his lack of engagement meant that my success would come as a complete surprise and potentially a threat to his understanding of our relationship dynamic. I think I need to show him rather than just tell him, I said finally. Let him see the client materials, the project scopes, the professional relationships I've been building. Make it real rather than abstract. Carmen smiled. That sounds like a good strategy. When, tonight, I said, surprising myself again with the decisiveness of my response. After the Morrison kickoff call Monday, there won't be any going back. If I'm going to include him in this transformation, it has to be now. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. I arranged Eleanor's centerpieces with mechanical precision while mentally rehearsing how I would present 2 years of hidden professional development to the husband who thought my biggest accomplishment was helping Mrs. Rodriguez update her website. By the time I left Petal and Stem, I had decided exactly how I wanted to handle the conversation. I would show David everything: the Morrison Industries contract, the Carfield Communications opportunity, the portfolio of work I had been building, the financial projections that would make my business sustainable long-term. I would give him the chance to see who I had been becoming while he thought he already knew who I was. The question was whether he would be proud of me for achieving something significant, or threatened by the discovery that I had achieved it without him. David found me in the guest bedroom that evening, surrounded by printed contracts, design portfolios, and financial spreadsheets that covered every surface of my makeshift office. I had been arranging and rearranging the materials for an hour, trying to find the perfect way to present 2 years of hidden professional achievement to a husband who thought I spent my days arranging flowers and sketching in notebooks. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the scene with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Maya, what's all this? I looked up from the Morrison Industries contract I had been holding, suddenly aware that there was no gentle way to bridge the gap between who he thought I was and who I had actually become. This is what I've been working on. My real work. David stepped into the room slowly, his eyes scanning the business documents and creative materials with growing confusion. He picked up a client testimonial letter from a restaurant owner whose business had doubled after I redesigned their brand identity. I don't understand, he said, reading the letter twice before looking back at me. This client is saying you increased their revenue by 40%. That's not possible from logo design. It's not just logo design, I replied, standing up and moving to my laptop. It's comprehensive brand strategy. Understanding what makes customers choose one business over another, then creating visual and messaging systems that communicate those differentiators effectively. I opened my portfolio website, which I had been refining for months but had never shown him. Project after project filled the screen, each with detailed case studies, before and after metrics, and client testimonials that told the story of businesses transformed through strategic creative thinking. David stared at the screen in silence, scrolling through work that represented hundreds of hours of research, strategy development, and creative execution. When he reached the Morrison Industries proposal, his scrolling stopped completely. "Maya, this contract is for more money than I make in a quarter," he said, his voice carrying a note I had never heard before. Not quite disbelief, but something close to it. "It's the initial project," I said quietly. "They want to expand it into an 18-month retainer that would be worth more than your annual salary." The words hung between us like a revelation that changed the fundamental mathematics of our relationship. For 3 years, David had been the primary earner while I contributed what his family considered insignificant supplemental income from part-time work. In the span of a single conversation, that dynamic had completely reversed. "When did this happen?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "When did you become this?" The question revealed everything about how disconnected he had been from my actual daily experience. "It's been building for 2 years," I explained. "Started with helping Mrs. Rodriguez, then word-of-mouth referrals, then deliberate business development. I've been working on this every morning before you wake up, every evening after you go to sleep, every weekend when you thought I was just sketching." David processed this information slowly, and I watched his expression shift through several stages of realization. First surprise, then something that might have been pride, then something more complicated that I couldn't quite identify. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, finally. It was the question I had been dreading, because the honest answer would force us to confront uncomfortable truths about our relationship. "Because you never asked," I said simply. "You knew I was working on design projects, but you never wanted to know the details. You called it my art hobby and seemed content to leave it at that." The accusation stung him. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. "That's not fair. I've always been supportive of your creative work." "Supportive in the abstract," I agreed, "but not curious enough to understand what that work actually involved." "David, I've been building a business for 2 years, and until tonight, you couldn't have told anyone what services I actually provide to my clients." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, perhaps realizing that I was right. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of unspoken questions about what else we might not really know about each other. "There's more," I said, picking up the notes from my conversation with Jennifer Carfield. "I have a meeting with a New York agency next week. They want to discuss partnership opportunities that could expand this into something much larger." I explained the Carfield Communications opportunity, watching David's expression grow more complicated with each detail. This wasn't just about one successful project anymore. This was about a career trajectory that would require travel, client presentations, and professional commitments that would reshape how we structured our life together. "You're talking about becoming a different person," he said, when I finished explaining the scope of what lay ahead. "No," I corrected gently. "I'm talking about becoming myself fully, instead of hiding parts of who I am to make other people more comfortable." The distinction was important, and I could see that David understood its implications. For 3 years, I had minimized my ambitions and downplayed my capabilities to fit into his family's expectations and his understanding of our relationship dynamic. What he was discovering wasn't that I had changed, but that he had never really seen me clearly. "My mother is going to hate this," he said suddenly, and I realized we had reached the heart of what was really troubling him. "Your mother already hates me," I pointed out. "At least now she'll have to find new reasons." David laughed despite himself, but the humor didn't reach his eyes. "She's going to say I should have known, that I should have been paying better attention. Should you have been?" The question forced him to confront his own role in the dynamic we had created. David's lack of curiosity about my work hadn't been malicious, but it hadn't been innocent either. On some level, he had been content to see me as less ambitious, less driven, less professionally significant than he was. My hidden success challenged not just his understanding of me, but his understanding of himself as the primary achiever in our partnership. "Probably," he admitted. "But Maya, this changes everything. Not just financially, but practically. If you're traveling to Chicago and New York regularly, if you're managing projects this complex, if you're earning this kind of money." "If I'm successful," I finished for him. "If you're successful," he agreed, and I heard something in his voice that might have been fear. We talked until nearly midnight, working through the practical implications of my business expansion, and the emotional implications of David's discovery that he had been married to someone quite different from who he thought he knew. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was honest in ways that our relationship hadn't been for months. The Morrison Industries kickoff meeting took place in a gleaming conference room on the 34th floor of a Chicago skyscraper. Patricia Morrison led a team of 8 executives through a presentation that outlined their vision for brand transformation with the kind of strategic sophistication I had only read about in business case studies. "We're not just updating our visual identity," Patricia explained, advancing through slides that showed market research, competitive analysis, and consumer behavior data. "We're repositioning ourselves for the next phase of our growth, and we need our brand to reflect capabilities and values that our current image doesn't communicate." I had prepared extensively for this meeting, but being in the room with Morrison's leadership team was different from imagining it. These were people who made decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in annual revenue. They were trusting me to help them navigate one of the most important strategic initiatives in their company's history. "Maya," Patricia said, turning the presentation over to me, "we'd like you to walk us through your initial strategic framework." For the next hour, I presented research and recommendations that represented everything I had learned about effective brand positioning over 2 years of client work. I analyzed their competitive landscape, identified gaps in market perception, and outlined a comprehensive approach to realigning their brand identity with their business objectives. The questions that followed were sophisticated and challenging. Morrison's executives pushed back on my assumptions, tested my reasoning, and demanded specificity about timelines and measurables. It was exactly the kind of rigorous professional dialogue I had been craving without realizing it. When the meeting concluded, Patricia walked me to the elevator. "That was exceptional," she said. "I want you to know that we interviewed 3 other agencies before making our decision. Your strategic thinking is exactly what we need." The validation was profound, but it was also complicated by the knowledge that I would be returning home to a family that still saw me as David's unambitious wife who played with flower arrangements and sketched in notebooks. The flight to New York Thursday afternoon felt like traveling between 2 different versions of my life. In Chicago, I had been Maya Chen, strategic brand consultant, equal partner in high-stakes business discussions. In a few hours, I would be presenting to Jennifer Carfield's team, potentially securing partnerships that would establish Chen Creative Solutions as a legitimate player in corporate branding. But somewhere between these professional triumphs was the reality of my personal life, where David was still processing the discovery of who I actually was, and where Eleanor Montgomery remained convinced that I was a burden on her family's reputation. Carfield Communications occupied 2 floors of a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, with exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and the kind of carefully curated creative aesthetic that signaled serious business disguised as artistic rebellion. Jennifer met me in the lobby, and I immediately understood why her firm had been so successful. She radiated the kind of confident competence that made clients trust her with their most important marketing investments. "Maya, welcome to New York," she said, leading me through a workspace where teams of strategists, designers, and project managers collaborated on campaigns for clients whose logos I recognized from Fortune 500 lists. "Ready to show us what you've got?" The presentation went better than I had dared to hope. Jennifer's team asked insightful questions, challenged my assumptions in productive ways, and demonstrated genuine enthusiasm for the strategic approach I had developed. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment before Jennifer spoke. "This is exactly the kind of thinking we've been looking for," she said. "Maya, we'd like to offer you 3 projects immediately, with the possibility of a formal partnership arrangement if the collaboration works as well as we expect." The projects she described were exactly what I had been hoping for: comprehensive brand overhauls for established companies undergoing significant transitions. The combined value of the contracts was more than I had earned in my entire previous career. But more than the financial opportunity, what struck me was the respect with which Jennifer's team had engaged with my work. They treated my insights as valuable, my experience as relevant, and my potential as unlimited. It was the complete opposite of every interaction I had ever had with the Montgomery family. I flew home Friday evening with signed contracts that would transform Chen Creative Solutions from a promising startup into an established business with national clients and growth projections that would require hiring employees within months. David met me at the airport, and I could see in his expression that he was still processing the implications of everything I had revealed earlier that week. During the drive home, I told him about the Morrison Industries meeting and the Carfield Communications partnership. Watching his face as he realized that this wasn't just about one successful project, this was about a career transformation that would make me financially independent and professionally recognized in ways that would be impossible to ignore or minimize. "I'm proud of you," he said, when I finished describing the week's developments. "I'm also a little overwhelmed by how much I didn't know about what you were capable of." "I'm still the same person," I reminded him. "I just finally have the opportunity to show what I can do." But even as I said it, I wasn't entirely sure it was true. The Maya who had sat silently through Eleanor's birthday dinner attacks felt like a different person from the Maya who had just negotiated partnership deals with sophisticated New York agencies. Success hadn't changed my fundamental character, but it had changed my understanding of what I was worth and what I was willing to tolerate. That realization would prove more significant than I understood at the time. The reckoning came the following Saturday at Eleanor's dinner party. David and I arrived to find the Montgomery dining room transformed with the centerpieces I had designed, elegant arrangements that perfectly complemented Eleanor's vision while demonstrating a level of sophistication that elevated the entire evening's aesthetic. "Maya, these are beautiful," Amanda said as we took our seats. David's sister had always been the most diplomatic member of the family, but tonight her compliment felt genuine rather than obligatory. "Thank you," I replied, settling into my chair with a confidence I hadn't possessed the last time I sat at this table. Eleanor was holding court at the head of the table, describing her charitable initiative to a group of couples whose attention and approval clearly energized her. The cause was worthy, supporting educational programs for underprivileged children, but I found myself listening to her presentation with new ears. Everything Eleanor said was technically accurate, but she positioned herself as the driving force behind work that was actually being done by program coordinators, teachers, and community organizers, whose names she never mentioned. She was taking credit for creating change while minimizing the contributions of people who were actually implementing the solutions. It was exactly the kind of positioning that I had learned to identify and address in my corporate branding work, taking responsibility for outcomes without acknowledging the systems and people who made those outcomes possible. "Maya has been such a help with the floral arrangements," Eleanor said during a lull in the conversation, gesturing toward the centerpieces with the gracious smile she used when she wanted to appear magnanimous. "It's wonderful when people find ways to contribute according to their abilities." The comment was vintage Eleanor, superficially supportive while actually diminishing. She was acknowledging my work while simultaneously positioning it as a minor, decorative contribution to her more important endeavors. 6 months ago, I would have smiled and accepted the backhanded compliment. Tonight I felt something different. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of clarity about the dynamic she was trying to maintain. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying across the table with more authority than anyone expected, "floral design is just a small part of what I do. My primary business is strategic brand consulting for corporate clients." The statement landed in the middle of Eleanor's dinner party like a stone dropped into still water. Conversations paused as guests turned their attention to this unexpected development from the woman they had been introduced to as David's wife, who worked part-time at a flower shop. Eleanor's smile became fixed, but I could see confusion flickering behind her eyes. "How interesting," she said carefully. "What kind of corporate clients?" "Manufacturing companies, primarily," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "I just finished a comprehensive brand overhaul for Morrison Industries. It's an 18-month project that will reposition them for expansion into new markets." I could see David watching me from across the table, his expression somewhere between pride and concern. He hadn't expected me to reveal this much so publicly, but I had made a decision that this performance of minimized expectations needed to end. "Morrison Industries," one of the male guests said, leaning forward with interest. "I know that company. Patricia Morrison has been featured in Forbes several times for their innovative management approach." "Patricia is an exceptional leader," I agreed. "Working with her team has been an incredible opportunity to apply strategic branding principles at a scale I hadn't tackled before." Eleanor's confusion was deepening into something sharper. I had no idea you were involved in business consulting, she said, and I could hear the carefully controlled edge in her voice. There's quite a lot you don't know about me, I said gently. For instance, next week, I'm flying to New York to finalize partnership agreements with Carfield Communications. They're a strategic marketing firm that works with Fortune 500 companies. The silence that followed was profound. Eleanor's dinner party guests were staring at me with expressions ranging from surprise to impressed curiosity. Richard had put down his wine glass and was studying me with the analytical attention he usually reserved for legal briefs. Amanda was smiling in a way that suggested she was enjoying seeing her mother caught off guard. And Eleanor herself looked like someone who had just discovered that the foundation of her understanding about the world was built on incorrect assumptions. Maya, she said slowly, are you saying that you run a consulting business? I'm saying that I've been running a consulting business for 2 years. I corrected. Chen Creative Solutions specializes in helping established companies rebrand for growth. We work with clients who are ready to invest in strategic positioning that will differentiate them in competitive markets. The we was aspirational. I hadn't hired employees yet, but it accurately reflected where the business was headed with the Morrison and Carfield partnerships. How fascinating, Eleanor said, but her voice had lost its usual warmth. David, I had no idea you were married to an entrepreneur. David cleared his throat, and I could see him making a decision about how to respond. Maya is incredibly talented, he said finally. I'm constantly amazed by what she accomplishes. It wasn't the strongest possible endorsement, but it was public support from someone whose opinion Eleanor valued. More importantly, it was acknowledgement that I was someone worth being amazed by. The conversation that followed was unlike any I had experienced at a Montgomery family gathering. Guests asked thoughtful questions about my work, shared their own experiences with business development, and treated me as someone whose professional insights were worth hearing. Eleanor participated in the conversation, but I could see her recalibrating everything she thought she knew about me and my place in her family's hierarchy. The woman she had dismissed as unambitious and worthless was being recognized by her own social circle as someone whose business acumen deserved respect. But more than that, I was demonstrating a kind of professional competence that Eleanor herself had never possessed. Her charitable work, while meaningful, was essentially volunteer coordination supported by her family's wealth and social connections. I was building something that created measurable value and generated significant income through my own strategic thinking and creative execution. The power dynamic between us had fundamentally shifted, and we both knew it. After dinner, as guests mingled in the living room, Eleanor approached me with the careful politeness of someone trying to regain control of a situation that had slipped away from her. Maya, I owe you an apology, she said, though her tone suggested the words were difficult for her to say. I clearly underestimated your professional capabilities. You underestimated me as a person, I corrected gently. But I understand why. I wasn't ready to show you who I really was until now. The distinction was important, and Eleanor seemed to recognize its implications. She had been wrong about me not because she lacked information, but because she had made assumptions based on prejudices about what constituted worth and potential. I hope you'll forgive my earlier comments, she continued. I can see now that they were inappropriate. I appreciate that, I said, and meant it. But Eleanor, I need you to understand something. Your approval has never been what I was working toward. I was working toward becoming someone I could respect, regardless of whether anyone else understood or valued what I was building. The conversation ended there, but its impact rippled through the remainder of the evening. Other guests sought me out to discuss business strategy and creative problem solving. David's colleagues at the law firm suddenly seemed interested in my perspective on client relations and professional development. Most significantly, David himself seemed to be seeing me clearly for the first time in years. On the drive home, he was unusually quiet until we were nearly to our house. Maya, he said finally, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you acknowledgement that I've been married to someone remarkable, and I somehow managed to miss that completely. You weren't missing it, I said softly. You were seeing the version of me that felt safe to show you. Tonight was the first time I felt confident enough to be completely honest about who I am and what I'm capable of. The conversation that followed was the most honest we had had since the early days of our relationship. David acknowledged that he had been content to see me as less ambitious than I actually was because it made his own career pressures feel more manageable. I admitted that I had hidden my professional development, partly to avoid conflict, but partly because I hadn't been sure I could succeed at the level I was attempting. "What happens now?" he asked, as we pulled into our driveway. "Now I become who I've been building toward," I said, "and you decide whether you want to be married to that person." It wasn't a threat or an ultimatum, it was simply the truth about where we stood. The Maya who had tolerated Eleanor's contempt and David's benign neglect was disappearing, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't accept anything less than genuine respect. 6 months later, Forbes published their annual list of rising entrepreneurs under 35. My name appeared in the section highlighting innovative approaches to corporate branding, with a feature article about how Chen Creative Solutions was helping established companies navigate identity transformation in rapidly changing markets. The article included quotes from Patricia Morrison and Jennifer Carfield about the strategic value of working with consultants who understood both creative excellence and business fundamentals. It described my background growing up in an immigrant family and my unconventional path from community college to corporate consulting success. Most importantly, it included my company's revenue projections for the following year. Numbers that placed my business in a category that even Eleanor Montgomery couldn't dismiss as insignificant. David framed the article and hung it in his office at Montgomery and Associates. Amanda shared it on her social media with a caption about being proud of her sister-in-law's achievements. Richard mentioned it to colleagues as an example of entrepreneurial success that impressed him more than inherited wealth. And Eleanor never again questioned my worth or my place in their family. But by then her approval had become irrelevant. I had spent so much energy trying to prove myself worthy of acceptance by people whose values I didn't share that I had almost forgotten the more important goal of becoming someone I could respect. The woman Eleanor had called worthless was never worthless. She was just waiting for the right opportunity to show what she was actually worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.